Hello everyone, welcome to Katharine's Creatures. This is a series where I get to talk a little bit about and touch base upon various mythological beast beings and the like, pulled from lore worldwide. And I always like to preface by saying that I am not a linguist, so if I mispronounce anything, I do apologize in advance. Today I want to talk about a different sort of entity, creature, and this one is interesting because it's not exactly a true legendary or mythic creature as we think of it today. It's actually more recognized because of the fact we use it so much in modern day fantasy and horror, and this is the gargoyle. Now, the gargoyle is based on the kind of architectural style of architecture where they use these kind of grotesque bestial statues and parts of sculptural design, the most famous being the Cathedral Notre Dame in Paris. Gargoyles were added to it during a reconstruction during the 19th century, and they're kind of like the iconic quintessential gargoyles that we think of, at least in shape and form and function. The name gargoyle actually is based on this elemental design, which is, again, these what were originally water spouts, fancy glorified water spouts. They were designed specifically to funnel the water from the roofs and eject it off and away from the building so that the water itself would not actually damage and erode the mortar between the masonry, the brickwork. And so there was a form and function for their design, even though they kind of have this frightful shape and presence. Now, the word comes from France, and it stems from the concept of the gullet or the throat. Again, if you think about it, these kind of water spouts funneling the water out of the mouths of these creatures and away from the building, so that kind of makes sense. And the word gargoyle actually kind of stems even further back to a Latin word that is the root word for the concept of to swallow. And so certain people think that it was kind of utilized because it represents the gurgling sound of water, again, for its original purpose, which is a water spout. Now, there is a French legend that utilizes the name gargoyle for a creature. So I will give this one here because it's the closest thing to a true myth associated with gargoyles as monstrous entities. And in this legend, there was Saint Romanus. And Saint Romanus essentially freed the country around, and hopefully pronounce this correctly, Rouen, from a monster which they was either termed or called the gargoyle or the goji. Essentially, this creature looked like a typical dragon, has this lizard-like form, bat-like wings, long neck, and breathe fire. And the saint was able to, or the man who became a saint afterwards, eventually was able to subdue the creature by either using a crucifix or captured it, and with the aid of one volunteer, and the volunteer was surprisingly a condemned man. And so the two of them together capture this creature, bring it back to the city, whereupon they set it on fire to slay it. Now, because the gargoyle or the goji was able to breathe fire itself, the entire body burns away except the head and neck. And so they took the head and neck of this dead creature and they tacked it on the wall, kind of just to hopefully scare away all the villainous entity spirits. It's a common trope, but to remember this creature, they tacked the head and neck of it on the wall because it was the only part that wasn't able to burn in the fire. Anywho, so that is supposedly one potential legend of the idea of these gargoyles as monsters. But honestly, outside of that, the idea of these animated, almost fearsome creatures really is something that more of a modern interpretation. Gargoyles themselves were thought at varying points of history to actually keep away evil spirits. And maybe that's in part of why they started being incorporated more of the design of certain buildings and kind of not necessarily focusing on the fact that their original purpose was these water spouts. But it was only really recently where we started utilizing them and talking about them in these stories. Again, the horror side and the fantasy side, where there are these animated creatures and entities that are brought to life during some kind of magical reasoning, or because they are possessed by some kind of demonic force. But that is modern. The legend, the only legend that has any kind of bearing to a potential creature, is the French one of essentially a dragon. And beyond that, they are unusual designs that had a function and a reason. So that is the story of the gargoyle as I have found it and done my research for. If you have any questions about this or anything else, please post them in the comments below or reach out to me on any of my social media. And until next time, everyone, Skål.